Welcome back to CNBC Africa's budget coverage. I'll be with you for the next half hour. I'm Chris Bishop. Now, South Africa's budget 2018 targets high net worth individuals. That's rich people in English. And so those who fancy the finer things in life. But what does it mean for people's planning for the future? What about savings? Now, joining me are Gerald Mwandiambira, Acting CEO of South African Savings Institute, and John Manyike, Head of Financial Education at Old Mutual. Now, both of you deal with a lot of high net worth individuals. How do you think people tonight who are sitting back at home, starting with you, Gerald, looking at their pile, where they're going to put it, invest it, what do you think they'll be saying about this budget?
I think the budget is not solving a fundamental problem in that we haven't increased the tax base. All we've done is increase the burden on those who are earning more. So obviously, as a high net worth individual, you're starting to get more inquiries about people looking at emigrating, getting citizenship for residency purposes, for the simple reason that the burden is cumbersome if you are wealthy. If you're earning more than 1.5 million rand, you're basically paying 500,000 in taxes for the poor. And that's quite a lot of people you're looking after as an individual, but it's also a lot of money which you're giving away.
Sure. John, we come straight to you here. Just your initial reaction. What sort of inquiries are you getting from high net worth individuals?
Look, I think for me, it ticked a lot of boxes. I mean, for, buy ourselves some time from rating agencies. Well, I'm not saying it's only done for them, but I think there was a lot of balancing act. I mean, I think the VAT, for example, was unavoidable. Yes, we might say, well, the consumers are going to take a knock, and there is a bit of a cushion for the poor there. But I think broadly speaking, I mean, people are going to feel it a little bit, because I mean, it means for every 100 rand, you can expect to pay an extra 88 cents. So, which means your groceries are not going to be as full as they used to be. So which means you're going to be very prudent when it comes to your financial decision making.
Gerald, what do you think is going to hurt high net worth people the most, do you think, looking at this budget we've had today?
I think the individual taxation, the tax bracket creep which is happening is going to obviously hurt. And I think it's also affecting the most skilled resources the country has. So it is a dangerous place to be taxing heavily, because you have more and more of these people who the country relies on starting to have that second thought about, how can I actually reduce my tax liability? So that's big to consider. What we also didn't really see in the budget is something which was pro-savings. Late last year, the country moved from a negative savings ratio to a slightly positive savings ratio, currently at 0.2%, which is savings to disposable income. And what you're going to get now with this 1% increase in VAT and the significant increase in the fuel taxes is an erosion of this little bit of savings which was starting to happen again. And I think this is worrying from a savings proponent and somebody who's very much an activist who says, let's save more, let's invest more. This is going to erode the savings capability of the average earner. And also it means that we're taking a step back. Tax-free savings accounts enjoyed an increase last year in terms of the tax-free threshold, and it would have been nice to see it happen again this year, just to keep that savings behavior or promotion going on.
John, perhaps you can tell us better than anybody around this table. South Africans have got a very bad reputation as savers, poor savers, they say. Do you think this might make it worse, this budget?
Well, I think we need to look at this in the context of what's happening in the economy and what does it mean. I mean, we are in a low inflationary environment. I think the rand is becoming stronger. I think there is an opportunity there for the governor of the Reserve Bank to start looking at that interest rate and perhaps maybe another cut, which will provide a much needed relief. But I think the question is whether any form of relief that consumers will get, are they going to use it for savings, or is it going to be for consumption?
But overall, Gerald, I mean, just take ourselves back this time last year. I mean, we were facing, in a month's time, the firing of the finance minister. There were downgrades to junk. There was all kinds of talk. Isn't surely the confidence trajectory on another way here? Are surely not your investors telling you that?
I think we're starting to get that sentiment, and the positive sentiment starting to creep back. I think the president still has a balancing act in terms of the cabinet which he appoints, but obviously from the perspective of externals looking inside South Africa, we've stopped the bleeding. So we've patched it up, and we are definitely looking a lot more positive in terms of an investment destination. But again, as some of the commentators are saying, will there be actions to follow some of these important decisions?
Okay, well, just before we go back to you, John, one thing I'd like to say, one of the great things in this budget people were expecting was a chop, at least, at the state-owned enterprises. Now, the loss-making state-owned enterprises were at the top of the list when this particular budget came about. But when Finance Minister Manyike went into pre-budget lockup in Cape Town, let's get a taste of what he had to say about them. The state-owned enterprises of South Africa cost the taxpayer more and more. In 2016-17 alone, the 6 largest state-owned companies borrowed $98.1 billion to stay afloat. No more, says the Finance Ministry. State-owned companies are expected to fund their own operation. It's not fair for taxpayers' money to be used for continual bailouts caused by operational inefficiency and financial mismanagement, says Manyike, Finance Minister, in the pre-budget lockup in Pretoria. The government says it has come up with a turnaround plan. Part of it is to sell off 195,000 government-owned properties worth an estimated 40 billion rand. Now, John, straight to you now. I mean, one thing that struck me about this budget was I was waiting for them to say, right, okay, we're going to cut staff, we're going to restrict budgets, we're going to sell off, we're going to privatise. And all we got, really, I could look through 195,000 properties worth 40 billion rand. What does that mean? There was no clear strategy.
Yeah, look, I think the angel is in the detail, and I think one can expect to hear more from government in terms of how they will go about doing that. I think for me, what was encouraging is the political willingness to actually start closing the fiscal gap. Very important, and I think you look at it's a significant improvement compared to the previous fiscal year. So I think we need to look at those things. I think anywhere where there's a pocket where you can actually cut the fat, that's going to be very, very important. I think they were able to do this. I mean, if you're able to show a reduction in the deficit in spite of the free higher education, which was announced in December, I think there's been a lot of tap dancing there.
Now we're going to go live now on the phone to Standard & Poor's, the rating agency. They've been obviously complaining for a long time about the loss-making state-owned enterprises. Ravi Bhatia, Director Sovereign Ratings of S&P Global, joins us now. Ravi, what did you think? I mean, there was very little in this budget about the state-owned enterprises. As a ratings agency, what did you think?
Well, overall, I mean, I think we're seeing it coming back on a fairly sustainable fiscal trajectory. I mean, there are some questions there. The debt trajectory is back on a broadly stabilizing path. And of course, they bit the bullet on the VAT side. Still on the expenditure side, there's still, it's still a bit of a gradual adjustment, and most of the adjustment is in the outer years, so that's something to watch. They also had to accommodate the free education, which kind of counterbalanced the expenditure ceiling cuts. Overall, we've seen, we were concerned in MTBPS, and now it seems there's a fairly reasonable path again on the fiscal side. Again, it relies on growth being quite better. They revised growth up, and there's a question mark on whether that will be materialized. And yes, as you say, there wasn't actually that much on the SOE side and support for the big SOEs.
Doesn't that worry you at all?
I mean, from a sovereign point of view, we're looking at the sovereign and the overall fiscal story. But from an ESCOM point of view, I mean, our ESCOM analysts, that it might worry them that there's no support for ESCOM.
So one question I have for you, the other week at the World Economic Forum in Davos, our new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, he said when we meet the rating agencies again in February, we're going to get a lot better reception from them than perhaps we did last year. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, we've taken quite a lot of a rating action in November, and we took one earlier last year as well. So now we're on double B, stable on the foreign currency, and this is a fairly credible budget. I mean, it remains to be seen issues around implementation and whether they will get the revenues that they foresee and whether they'll control the expenditure side as planned. So we'll watch the implementation side of this budget. And
just very briefly and lastly, what would you have liked to have seen a little bit extra, you think, from this budget?
Well, I mean, we don't give policy advice. The issues around structural reform, I believe they're going to be forthcoming. I mean, there wasn't that much in terms of, it was more of a fiscal story in the budget. There wasn't that much on the structural reform side to boost growth, but I believe that's planned, and they're going to come out with some in the near future.
Thank you very much, Ravi Bhatia of S&P Sovereign Ratings, joining us live on the line there. Straight back into the studio, Gerald. What do you think about the man from the ratings agency there?
I think this budget was very friendly towards the ratings agency. So the simple purpose that the foreign debt servicing bill has been increasing at a rate of 15% per annum. Each downgrade costs the economy a massive amount in terms of the increase which follows in terms of debt servicing. So the country could not afford to go through another debt or a sovereign debt downgrade. So what we've seen here is a budget which basically says we are stopping the rot and we're going to start fixing the core of the problem. And what he was addressing is really the structural issues, which is the inefficiencies which we have seen in government. You saw that number, 98 or over 90 billion in borrowings for state-owned entities through mismanagement, and some of it was 41 billion through irregular expenditure. So those are structural issues which still need to be addressed, but what the government has committed to is stopping the rot. And I think this is the first step of many moves which the government needs to make to take us back on the right trajectory, to back into budget surplus territory. We still need to create the jobs, and that's another big thing which wasn't really addressed. Yes, we've got free fees, which will mean that we're going to get a greater flow of university graduates. Where are they going to work?
Isn't that one of the great tales of Zimbabwe to the north, and the fact that hundreds of thousands of people were trained with no jobs at the end of it? But John, I mean, just staying on this ratings thing, while we're still talking about the budget, the man said they're looking a lot brighter, and we may avoid another downgrade this year. How long do you realistically think it's going to take before South Africa actually gets upgraded again, shall we say, to where it was?
Yeah, I think it all depends on what happens over the next 2 to 3 years. But at least I'm encouraged by the continuity around the fiscal consolidation. We know that back during Pravin's time, I mean, he spoke about fiscal consolidation. We're seeing a bit of continuity as far as that is concerned. But also, I think it's also good to see a stabilization of our debt to GDP ratio. That's encouraging. But also I agree with my friend here that perhaps we could have seen more aggression around infrastructure development. The reason I say that is because we know that we're suffering from structural unemployment. So yes, I do note that at least the minister had to also look at other alternatives like stimulating growth of SMMEs and with the funding that's been put aside there. But we know for a fact, I mean, if we want to see a massive change in job creation, it's about creating labor-intensive jobs. And that you will most likely going to see when there's a lot more aggression in infrastructure development. But again, you have to give it to him. I mean, he was working on a very tight budget. But hopefully, you know, we'll start shifting and looking at how we absorb that unskilled labor.
Gerald, overall, do you think this government, especially there's an election coming up next year, and there's another budget before then, do you think this new government's got the stomach, you think, for all these kind of austerity and harsh, nasty medicine that the economy needs to take, you think, in the next year?
I think when a government is facing an election, they have to. It's one of those spaces where they needed to follow through on the fee education. They need to follow through on on creating jobs and opportunities in the SME space. So I believe that because we are entering an election year, the likelihood that this budget will be kept to is high, is very high, because we're entering an election year and the government cannot afford to misstep, especially in an election year.
John, so the prospects looking ahead now for savings and investment. You think if you're out there with your pay packet, whatever you're lucky enough to have one, what do you think your mindset's going to be tonight at the end of this budget?
Yeah, I think we need to make a lot of noise about the importance of prudent spending going forward. I think the VAT will certainly play a factor, even though there might be, if we're lucky, there might be a rate cut. But I think we need to be very prudent with our financial decision making. We need to have a proper financial planning in place. We need to encourage savings, and I think we need more and more messages around savings. I think we need to emphasize that. South Africa needs that.
What do you say, Gerald?
I totally agree. Savings, savings, savings. We need to really be in that space that, because of the uncertainty we're facing, it's important to have that savings nest egg to cushion you. I mean, you've got a situation where the VAT exempted items are mealie meal, rice, brown bread, and brown beans. The average South African doesn't eat those four staples every day, and the average South African still has to catch transport to work. So we do have a bit of potentially inflationary pressure in terms of the fuel levy, but obviously a stronger rand will help us, and long may that continue, because at least that has given us hope in terms of saying that we can absorb these increases.
But we're coming near the end of the show now. I want final comments from you, but just before we go there, we were out and about on the streets today. Malusi Gigaba, it was his maiden budget speech, but also it could be his final budget speech. We're talking about reshuffle. So we went out onto the streets of South Africa and we spoke to the man in the street and the woman in the street exactly what they thought of their finance minister.
I don't think he should be presenting a budget because he's a Gupta stooge.
I don't have confidence. I never had confidence on Malusi Gigaba, and the best that he could do is to resign before he even starts his budget speech.
He needs to actually step down because the person who appointed him already is no longer in the office. So he needs someone who can do a better job and kind of like increase the confidence with the investors.
First and foremost, I don't think Malusi Gigaba should be doing the budget. We all know that he was embroiled in the state capture issue. He was one of the major players, and we all know it's obvious.
Minister of Finance, Minister Gigaba, you've heard our president. He said, send me. We as South Africans are sending you. Go and hand in your resignation. That's my message to you.
Bit harsh there. I thought he's a nice chap, Malusi, but I don't know, in his position, do you think he's going to survive a reshuffle? What do you think?
I think we need to realize that the budget is not set by the minister, it's set by the National Treasury, and there's a lot of competent folks there who have their eyes on the ball. So the integrity of the budget should not be questioned and pinned on the integrity or questionable integrity according to the comments we've just seen on the minister. So I think he did what he had to do. He delivered a budget which to the whole is very much positive and is in line with the State of the Nation addressed by the President, that we are in a hopeful space and South Africa should be looking better off for the next 12 months. But
the question now for you, John Manyike, who would you want in that chair? I mean, we've got to talk about it. Who would you want? Who would suit the savings?
I'm not going there.
You're not into politics, okay, fine. But I don't know. I mean, there's even talk about Emmanuel, talk about Pravin Gordhan.
Well, I'm sure the president will make the right decision together with his leadership, and I think, but I think he makes a good point that, remember, the budget speech is not just made up by the minister. Yes, he certainly does make input, but he's got a very solid team behind him that really assists in putting it together.
I'm saying whoever takes over the job, they're going to have one heck of a job, I think, to actually, because a lot of, as you said earlier, a lot of people forget, yes, this is a hopeful budget, but there's a lot of hard work to be done
I think yes, a lot of painful decisions still need to be made. And as much as we've always spoken as an institute on individual savings, this is the year in which government needs to come to the party and show a bit of austerity in terms of government savings, because the corporate sector has always led the way in the savings game. Individuals are starting to follow, and now we need government to start taking their position in terms of being able to save as an entity.
John, just quick last comment. We're about to wrap it up.
I think we need to de-jargonize the budget speech for a man in the street and actually drive financial education to the extent that people understand what it means for them and what sort of changes they need to make in terms of how they handle their finances going forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John Manyike of Old Mutual, and also Gerald Mwandiambira, the acting CEO of the South African Savings Institute. Thank you for your time. And just before we go, let's have a look at some of the tweets we've been getting in today. Right, let me understand this VAT hike. The poor will be taxed via VAT to fund free higher education for the poor. Then, question mark. Next. Okay, should we fail for new promises or evaluate the record over the last 5 years? In 2014, we were promised a new dawn of 5% growth. Well, we did have 5% growth in 2005, and 5 million jobs was promised a couple of years ago. We got a stagnant economy, record unemployment, record inequality, and a VAT increase. It's very harsh, but increasing VAT to 15% is like punishing all citizens for the looting of the few. I'm not quite sure that's the right syntax, but never mind. Anyone who quotes Hendrik Lamar, which Malusi Gigaba did during a budget speech, deserves my respect. Come on, Cyril, you can't fire this guy. So obviously they disagree with our Vox Pops, and he said Kendrick Lamar is an urban poet. I don't know if I can't help anybody on that one. President Silili Tuma Mina was seen after the budget speech. Honeymoon is over for sure. No, I'm certain that Cyril's going to get a lot of flack in the future. But hey, Malusi is out here quoting Hendrik Lamar in his budget speech. This is what happens when you make a cool kid that smokes humbly at Cubana your finance minister. Very harsh indeed, but never mind, it's a free country. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on this very special, very important day on CNBC Africa, where we've iterated and we've analysed the budget. Thank you very much from me, Chris Bishop, Head of Programming. It's goodbye.